Hello everyone, welcome to this special class of physics. Today we will start our first physics video lesson. Therefore, today we will start the first chapter, chapter 1, which is motion in one dimension. And today we will touch the following two main points. And at the end of this lesson, we will grasp the actual concept of motion, and you will have a chance to distinguish among the different types of motion. Do you know this? Everything in the universe is in a state of motion. For example, our planet Earth itself revolves about its axis with a speed of 460 meters per second, and it is traveling around the sun with a speed of 30,000 meters per second or 30 kilometers per second. And our planet Earth is also filled with different moving things. For instance, a car moving along the road, an airplane moving in the air, a bird flying in the air, and a horse racing in the field. Therefore, what is motion? How can you describe it? What is the main cause of motion of a body? And what is the precondition that we use to say a certain body is in motion? And how many types of motion do you know? Let us see the concept together. In fact, there are two approaches that we can use to define the term motion. And the first approach is the usual one. That is, motion is a continuous change in position of an object relative to a certain frame of reference. I think you know more about frame of reference. The other name of frame of reference is reference frame. Reference frame or frame of reference is a coordinate system or a point where measurements are taken. In other words, if you want to measure a certain physical quantity, so the position or the standing point is said to be reference frame. Therefore, in this approach of definition of motion, if a body changes its position with time continuously, then we can say it is in motion. But if a body stays in its state of rest, then it's not in motion. Therefore, based on this definition, the precondition that we use to say a certain body is in motion is change in position. That's great. And the second approach that we use to describe the term motion is a continuous change in position of particles of a body. And in this case, there is no change in the position of a body, except there is a change in particles found in that revolving body. Therefore, the rotation of Earth about its axis is a good example for this type of motion. In this case, or in other words, in the rotation of our planet Earth, there is no change in the position of the Earth, except change in things or materials found on Earth during its rotation about its axis. Generally, based on the nature of movement of a body, or based on the nature of motion of a body, motion can be classified into four types. The first one is rectilinear motion, and the second one is curvilinear motion, and the third one is rotary motion, and the last type of motion is vibratory or oscillatory motion. And now we will see turn by turn, and we will start from rectilinear motion. Students, what is rectilinear motion? Anyone can understand from the term rectilinear means straight line or one-dimensional. Therefore, rectilinear motion is the motion of an object that moves in a straight line path. Or rectilinear motion is the motion of an object that moves in a straight level road. And let me give you two examples for this type of motion. The first one is a car or a vehicle that moves in a straight level road. And the second one is the motion of train in railway track. And the second type of motion is, as I told you before, curvilinear motion. And this curvilinear motion is another type of motion where the object moves in a certain curved path. Therefore, whenever an object moves in a circular path or whenever an object moves in a curved path, its motion is said to be curvilinear motion. And in this case, the motion follows curved path. But don't forget, in case of rectilinear motion, the object follows a straight line path. And again, let me give you two examples for this type of motion or for curvilinear motion. The first one is a javelin thrown by an athlete. And second one is we can use rotation of our planet Earth around the sun. Is a good example of curvilinear motion. And you can add more example for these types of motion, whether it is rectilinear motion or curvilinear motion. You can list or you can add more examples. And the third types of motion is rotary motion. Rotary motion. Rotary motion is the motion of an object in a certain circular path around a fixed axis. So whenever a body moves around a curved path with its axis of rotation, then its motion is said to be rotary motion. And rotation of our planet Earth around its axis is a good example for these types of motion. I think you know more about this one from your previous knowledge of physics. That means our planet Earth rotates or makes one full cycle for every 24 hours. Therefore, rotation of our planet Earth about its axis is a good example of rotary motion. And spinning wheel is also another example of this type of motion. And the last but not the least types of motion is vibratory or oscillatory motion. The first one, vibratory or oscillatory motion. This vibratory or oscillatory motion is the motion of a body back and forth or up and down along the same line of action. And we can list two typical examples of this type of motion. The first one is mass on a spring system. The first example of this one is mass on a spring system. And second one is simple pendulum. To describe these types of motion, let us use the following situation. That means, assume here we have a spring, and one end of the spring is attached with that of a wall or a block. That means fixed. And the other end of the spring is free to move. This is spring. Therefore, what will happen when we stretch the spring to the right direction by applying a certain force on the spring? It stretches. Therefore, when we release it, what will happen? The spring starts to oscillate back and forth for a certain period of time before it comes to rest. Therefore, the back and forth movement of the spring as a result of applying an external force to the right horizontal direction is known as vibratory motion. So the motion of a spring back and forth is vibratory motion. And the same works for simple pendulum. Or when we change the position of the spring in such a way manner, that means, look this one. This is a fixed block. And as you observe here, this is a spring, and one end of the spring is fixed to the given block or what, and the other end of the spring, as you observe here, is free to move. Therefore, when we stretch the spring vertically downward by acting or by exerting a certain amount of force. And when we release it, what will happen? The spring starts to move or oscillate up and down before it comes to rest. Therefore, the up and down movement of a spring as a result of an external force acting on it is known as vibratory motion. Vibratory motion. And simple pendulum is also another good example of vibratory motion. Because, look this one. Here we have a pivot. A pivot here. And here we have a small ball which is bob. And this is string. As you observe here, this is string. So the bob is connected with that of string. And then if you want to make oscillation or motion, it's obvious that we have to displace the bob to the left or to the right direction with a certain distance. Therefore here, this is the distance that we displace the bob to the right direction. And then when we release it, what will happen? What will happen? The bob starts to oscillate back and forth in such a way manner, back and forth. So this back and forth movement of the bob along the same line of action is a good example of vibratory motion. Generally, based on the dimension that moving objects follows, motion can be classified into two groups or categories. Based on what? Based on the dimension of the moving objects. Motion can be classified into two. What are they? Motion in one dimension and motion in two dimension. Therefore, based on the dimension of moving objects, motion can be classified into two. Motion in one dimension and motion in two dimension. In this case, dimension means direction. Among the four different types of motion, both rectilinear motion and vibratory motion are an example of motion in one dimension. Generally, based on the dimension that moving object follows, motion can be classified into two. They are motion in one dimension and motion in two dimension. Among the four different types of motion, both rectilinear motion and vibratory motion are an example of motion in one dimension, because in both types of motion, the given moving object will have a single or specific dimension. There is no two components, velocity components of the moving body. And second types of motion, motion in two dimension. So the remaining types of motion, that means both curvilinear motion and rotary motions are an example of motion in two dimension. Since in both types of motion, the given moving object will have two velocity components. As a result, that means, as I told you before, whenever a body moves in a curved path, its motion is said to be curvilinear motion. Therefore, when a body changes its position from this point A to this point B, then in each movement of the curve, the given moving body will have two velocity components. The one which is tangent to the circle, and the other which is toward the center of the circle. And the same for rotary motion. When an object moves around its axis, it will have two velocity components. The one which is tangent to the circle and the other which is toward the center of the circle. And we will learn more about this rotational motion when we are discussing about another chapter about rotational motion. Remember, the cause of motion of an object is an external force acting on it. Students, let me ask you two challenging questions. The first one is, what do you think about the source of force? What is the source of force? What is the cause of the force that exists between two objects found on Earth or in the universe? And second question is, do you think that is it possible to disappear forces that exist between objects, or is it possible to get a region or a place which is free from force except vacuum or free space? Okay, let us see the concept together. The source of force is the interaction between objects. By nature, objects are interact with each other, and this interaction among objects brings or produces a certain force. And remember, objects make interaction with each other through two means or two ways. The first means is through a physical contact, or by making a body contact with each other. And the second mechanism that objects use is without a body contact. Therefore, there are two ways, or there are two methods that objects make interaction with each other. The first one is by making a physical contact, and the second one is without a physical contact. That's why force can be classified as contact and non-contact based on the way that objects use to make interaction with each other. And we will learn more about this when we are dealing about, or when we start the unit force in Newton's laws of motion. Students, this is what our first video lesson looks like. I hope you will enjoy it. In the next video, we will try to solve some selected problems, and this is very important to you to have good understanding about the concept of motion and the different types of motion. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribe and like, and you can share this video for your friends or students. See you next time. Thank you.